Welcome back to the Wealthy Good Life podcast. Today we are going to be tackling a question that I'm sure has crossed pretty much everyone's mind at one point or another, and that is, does money actually buy happiness?
It's a pretty classic question, isn't it? And there's certainly been no shortage of research trying to figure out the
Oh
answers.
yeah, tons and tons of research, and some of it is pretty surprising.
Yeah.
I think like a lot of people have probably heard of that study that said happiness kind of plateaus once you hit an income of $75,000 a year.
Yeah, right. The whole idea was that beyond a certain point, more money doesn't really lead to more happiness. It was a really popular study, too, published back in 2010.
Yeah, it really seemed to stick with people.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. More recent research has actually been challenging that whole $75,000 plateau idea. For example, a 2021 study found that for most people, happiness actually keeps increasing as their income grows. No plateau in sight.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting about that newer study is the way that they measured happiness. They actually had people use a smartphone app to track their feelings in real time throughout the day. So it wasn't just relying on like a one-time survey or anything.
So they were getting like a much more accurate picture of people's actual, day-to-day lived experiences.
Exactly. And that's how they were able to see that, for the vast majority of people, more money does seem to correlate with more happiness.
That's so interesting. But I'm sure some people listening are like, wait, hold on. Those studies have like completely opposite conclusions.
Well, that's where things get really fascinating. The researchers from those two studies that seem to have totally different conclusions. They actually teamed up to try and figure out why their results were so different. They called it an adversarial collaboration, which I love that term. It basically means that they're working together, even though they have these conflicting findings.
That's so cool. I love that. So what did they find when they teamed up like that?
Well, they ended up publishing a paper just last year in 2023 that offered a more nuanced and kind of a deeper understanding of the relationship between money and happiness. It turns out that the earlier study, the one that found the $75,000 plateau, it was primarily measuring unhappiness, like the lack of happiness, rather than kind of just overall happiness, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, so that kind of changes things a bit.
Exactly. It reframes it. And what they found was that, yes, there is a small group of people, about 20%, whose happiness does seem to increase with their income up to around $100,000, and then it levels off. But for most people, about 80%, their happiness continues to rise even beyond that point.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
So for that 80% of people where happiness keeps rising as income rises, what are some of the possible reasons why higher income might actually lead to more happiness?
Well, one idea is that money can act as a buffer against, all of life's stressors. So when you have more financial resources, you're less likely to be constantly worried about things like paying bills or dealing with unexpected expenses.
It's like having a safety net.
Exactly. And that feeling of security and control can really contribute to just feeling happier overall.
And it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, too. For most of human history, resources were scarce. So having enough or more than enough would have been a huge advantage for survival.
Absolutely. It's tied to that very primal drive that we all have to feel safe and secure and have enough resources to thrive. And, it's also connected to the idea of having more choices and more freedom. With more money, you just have more options available to you. You can travel, pursue hobbies, invest in your education, or even just have more flexibility in your day-to-day life.
So it's not necessarily about the money itself, but more about what the money allows you to do.
Exactly. It allows you to kind of craft and create a life that feels more aligned with your values and goals.
Hmm. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the connection between money and happiness, be sure to check out wealthygoodlife.com for even more insights and resources on this topic.
You'll find all sorts of articles, tips, and even a community of like-minded individuals who are on the same journey of creating a wealthy, good life. Now, let's talk about another fascinating finding.
Ooh, okay. I'm all ears.
Well, there's this growing body of research suggesting that while having more money can be linked to happiness, the constant seeking of more money might actually have the opposite effect.
So it's kind of about striking that balance, right?
Absolutely, because if you're always chasing financial success at the expense of everything else in your life, it can lead to, feeling empty and dissatisfied in the long run.
It's like that saying, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy you a jet ski.
Uh-huh.
And have you ever seen anyone sad on a jet ski?
Well, I'm sure there are exceptions to that rule, but
Yeah.
the point is that it's not really about the money itself. It's about how you use it and the role that it plays in your overall life.
So what about those people who have like millions and millions of dollars? Are they just, walking around in a state of bliss all the time?
Well, a 2017 study looked at the well-being of extremely wealthy individuals in the US, and what they found is pretty interesting.
Okay, tell me more.
It turns out that even among multimillionaires, there's a whole range of happiness levels. Some are extremely happy and some are not.
So even having a massive fortune doesn't guarantee happiness.
Right. And another interesting finding from that study was that happiness levels only really started to noticeably differ above the $10 million mark.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
It is, but the study also suggested that how you acquire your wealth might actually play a role in how happy you are.
What do you mean by that?
Well, those who inherited their fortunes actually reported lower levels of happiness compared to those who earned their wealth themselves.
That's so interesting. It makes you wonder about things like, winning the lottery. Is that really a ticket to lasting happiness?
There was a study done back in 2007 that looked at lottery winners, and it found that after kind of the initial shock and adjustment period, they did report being happier than non-winners, but it's not quite as simple as hitting the jackpot and, suddenly your life is perfect.
Yeah, it seems like there's always more to the story, right?
Right. And a more recent review of research in 2018 suggested that while winning, a moderate amount of money in the lottery might actually increase happiness, those like massive, life-changing sums didn't really have a noticeable impact.
Huh. So maybe it's not just about like the amount of money, but also how that money kind of comes into your life and what it represents.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that could be a factor. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about how we actually spend our money, because that plays a role in happiness too.
Yeah, okay, tell me more about that.
Have you ever noticed that when you buy something for someone else, it just like feels really good?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, there's a reason for that. It turns out spending money on others, what researchers call pro-social spending, has actually been shown to boost happiness.
So it's not just about, what you buy for yourself, but also how you use your money to connect with and support other people.
Exactly. And then there's that whole debate about experiences versus possessions.
Oh, yeah. Which brings more happiness, that fancy new gadget or that amazing trip you've been dreaming of.
Right. And research suggests that for most people, spending money on experiences actually leads to greater and longer lasting happiness than buying material goods.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
You might get tired of that new gadget after a while, but the memories of a great experience can stay with you for years.
Yeah, experiences create these lasting memories that become part of your personal story, while the thrill of a new possession tends to fade over time.
So, if you're looking to boost your happiness, maybe skip that shopping spree and book that trip you've been thinking about instead.
That's a great idea. And speaking of experiences, there's another way we can use money to kind of increase our happiness that I think is often overlooked.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's the idea of buying time.
Oh, I love that concept.
Hmm.
It's so easy to get caught up in like the hustle and bustle of life that we kind of forget how valuable our time really is.
Exactly. Think about all the things that we do each day that we don't necessarily enjoy or that feel like obligations rather than choices. Like maybe it's a long commute hours spent on chores or like all those, tedious administrative tasks that never seem to end.
And how often do we find ourselves just wishing we had more time for the things that we truly love, like spending time with loved ones or pursuing our hobbies or just simply relaxing and recharging?
That's exactly where buying time comes in. It's about strategically using our financial resources to free up our time for those things that bring us, genuine joy and fulfillment.
So, for example, instead of spending your whole weekend, cleaning the house, you could hire a cleaning service
Mhm.
and then use that time to, go on a hike or spend time with your family or do something you really enjoy.
Exactly. Or maybe you could order your groceries online instead of, spending an hour at the supermarket. Or you could even, consider working fewer hours or taking a sabbatical if that's financially feasible to pursue a passion project or spend more quality time with your family.
It's about kind of identifying those things that are just draining your energy and stealing your time, and then exploring ways to either delegate them or automate them, even if it means spending a little bit of money.
It's a mindset shift, from viewing those expenses as indulgences to seeing them as investments in our well-being and our happiness.
Because what's the point of having all this, financial abundance if you don't actually have the time to enjoy it?
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your time for the things that truly matter, the experiences that create those lasting memories, the connections that nourish your soul, and the activities that bring you joy.
And that's what the Wealthy Good Life is all about. If you want to learn more about how to create a life that is both financially abundant and deeply fulfilling, Be sure to visit wealthygoodlife.com. You'll find tons of articles, tips, and resources, plus a supportive community of like-minded individuals.
Now let's go back to the idea of work for a minute and kind of the workplace. Does earning a higher salary translate to happier employees?
That's a great question. It seems like it would, but maybe it's not that straightforward.
You're right. It's not as simple as just giving everyone a raise and suddenly the workplace is full of, joy and rainbows. But salary does play a pretty significant role in overall well-being.
It makes sense when you feel financially secure and valued by your employer. It can definitely reduce stress and boost your overall happiness.
Exactly. And beyond kind of the moral imperative of, paying employees fairly, there are clear business benefits as well.
Like what kinds of benefits?
Well, a 2020 study found that financial worries can cause significant stress and, decrease productivity in the workplace.
So when employees are struggling financially, it can actually hurt the company's bottom line.
That's right. Creating a work environment that supports financial well-being, it's good for the employees and it's good for the business. It's a win-win.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of really interesting ground today.
We have, but I do want to kind of circle back to something we talked about earlier, the idea that money itself isn't the source of happiness.
Okay, remind me what you mean by that.
It's really about how you use your money and the role it plays in your overall life. Money is a tool that can help you create a life that's more aligned with your values and goals.
So it's not about, chasing riches just for the sake of having a big bank account. It's about using your financial resources to build a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling.
Exactly. It's about investing in experiences, nurturing your relationships, supporting causes you care about, and taking care of your physical and mental health.
And maybe even buying yourself a little bit of time to do the things you love.
Yeah, it seems like we often get so caught up in, just this idea of more that we forget to appreciate what we already have and focus on those things that truly matter.
It's really easy to fall into that trap, especially, in a society that often equates success with material wealth.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly bombarded with these messages that tell us you need to buy this or achieve that in order to be happy.
But true happiness isn't really about keeping up with the Joneses. It's about finding contentment and fulfillment within yourself and, in those connections that you have with other people.
It's about creating a life that feels authentic and, aligned with your values.
Yeah, and appreciating those simple things, like a beautiful sunset or a good conversation with a friend.
Yeah, those are the moments that truly enrich our lives.
Speaking of simple things, I'm reminded of a study that was done in 2024 that looked at the well-being of people living in these small-scale, often indigenous communities.
Okay, tell me more about that. So these communities, they often have a really deep connection to nature, and they prioritize, strong social bonds and a sense of belonging.
It sounds like a very different way of life than what, a lot of us are used to.
It is, and what's so fascinating is that the people in these communities reported remarkably high levels of, life satisfaction, even though their incomes were significantly lower than, their counterparts in more industrialized nations.
That really challenges a lot of our assumptions about, what it takes to be happy. It suggests that material wealth isn't the only path to a fulfilling life.
Exactly. It's this reminder that, happiness is a holistic concept. It's about nurturing kind of all aspects of our being, physical, emotional, social, and spiritual.
And finding that balance between, work and leisure, between material pursuits and meaningful connections, between striving for more and appreciating what we already have.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about happiness is that it's this sort of destination that you arrive at.
Yeah, like once you achieve a certain level of success or acquire, a certain number of possessions, then you'll finally be happy.
Right. But happiness isn't this finish line that you cross. It's more of a journey, an ongoing process of growth and self-discovery.
Yeah, it's about, making those conscious choices each day that bring you joy and move you closer to the life that you want to create.
And accepting that, there are going to be ups and downs along the way. Life is full of challenges, but it's how we navigate those challenges that really shapes our, overall sense of well-being.
It's not about avoiding hardship or, pretending that everything is always perfect.
Yeah.
It's about developing resilience and finding ways to, cultivate joy, even amidst those difficult times.
Exactly. And speaking of, cultivating joy, I want to emphasize the importance of gratitude when we take the time to appreciate the good things in our lives. Even those small things can really shift our perspective and increase our happiness.
It's about focusing on what we have rather than what we lack.
And remember, we talked about the Wealthy Good Life website earlier. If you're looking for more tips and inspiration on how to create a life that's both financially abundant and, deeply fulfilling, be sure to check it out.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to, learn more about personal finance, well-being, and, creating a life that just feels aligned with their values. It's wealthygoodlife.com.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key takeaway that you hope our listeners will kind of walk away with?
That's a great question. I think, the most important thing to remember is that money is a tool. It can be used to enhance our well-being, but it's not the source of happiness itself. True happiness comes from within, from aligning our lives with our values, nurturing our relationships and finding joy in those simple things.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's about so much more than just, the numbers in your bank account.
Well said. So let's all strive to create a wealthy, good life, one that's filled with purpose, meaning, and those, genuine moments of joy that make life truly worth living.
And remember, you don't have to wait to start living that life. You can start making choices today that will move you in the right direction.
That's a great point. Thank you so much for joining us on the Wealthy Good Life podcast, and be sure to visit wealthygoodlife.com for even more insights and resources.
Until next time, take care.